Katana originates from Sasuga, a kind of tanto, short sword or knife, used by lower-ranking samurai who fought on foot in the Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333. Their main weapon was a long naginata and Sasuga was a spare weapon. In the Nanboku-cho period, 1336 to 1392, which corresponds to the early Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, long weapons such as odachi were popular, and along with this, Sasuga lengthened and finally became katana. Also, there is a theory that koshigatana, a kind of tanto which was equipped by high-ranking samurai together with tachi, developed to katana through the same historical background as Sasuga, and it is possible that both developed to katana. The oldest katana in existence today is called Hishizukuri Uchigatana, which was forged in the Nanboku-cho period, and was dedicated to Kasuga Shrine later. The first use of katana as a word to describe a long sword that was different from a tachi, occurs as early as the Kamakura period. These references to Uchigatana and Subagatana seem to indicate a different style of sword, possibly a less costly sword for lower-ranking warriors. Starting around the year 1400, long swords signed with the katana style were made. This was in response to samurai wearing their tachi in what is now called katana style, cutting edge up. Japanese swords are traditionally worn with the mei facing away from the wearer. When a tachi was worn in the style of a katana, with the cutting edge up, the tachi's signature would be facing the wrong way. The fact that swordsmiths started signing swords with a katana signature shows that some samurai of that time period had started wearing their swords in a different manner. By the 15th century, Japanese swords, including katana, had already gained international fame by being exported to China and Korea. For example, Korea learned how to make Japanese swords by sending swordsmiths to Japan and inviting Japanese swordsmiths to Korea. According to the record of June 1, 1430 in the veritable records of the Joseon dynasty, a Korean swordsmith who went to Japan and mastered the method of making Japanese swords presented a Japanese sword to the King of Korea and was rewarded for the excellent work which was no different from the swords made by the Japanese. Traditionally, yumi bows were the main weapon of war in Japan, and tachi and naginata were used only for close combat. The Anan War in the late 15th century in the Muromachi period expanded into a large-scale domestic war, in which employed farmers called ashigaru were mobilized in large numbers. They fought on foot using katana shorter than tachi. In the Sengoku period of warring states, in the late Muromachi period, the war became bigger and ashigaru fought in a close formation using yari, spears, lent to them. Furthermore, in the late 16th century, Tanegashima muskets were introduced from Portugal, and Japanese swordsmiths mass-produced improved products, with ashigaru fighting with leased guns. On the battlefield in Japan, guns and spears became main weapons in addition to bows. Due to the changes in fighting styles in these wars, the tachi and naginata became obsolete among samurai, and the katana, which was easy to carry, became the mainstream. The dazzling-looking tachi gradually became a symbol of the authority of high-ranking samurai. On the other hand, kenjutsu, swordsmanship, that makes use of the characteristics of katana was invented. The quicker draw of the sword was well suited to combat where victory depended heavily on short response times. The practice and martial art for drawing the sword quickly and responding to a sudden attack was called batojutsu, which is still kept alive through the teaching of Iaido. The katana further facilitated this by being worn thrust through a belt-like sash, obi, with the sharpened edge facing up. Ideally, samurai could draw the sword and strike the enemy in a single motion. Previously, the curved tachi had been worn with the edge of the blade facing down and suspended from a belt. From the 15th century, low-quality swords were mass-produced under the influence of the large-scale war. These swords, along with spears, were lent to recruited farmers called ashigaru and swords were exported. Such mass-produced swords are called kazuchimono, and swordsmiths of the Bison school and Mino school produced them by division of labor. The export of katana and tachi reached its peak during this period, from the late 15th century to early 16th century when at least 200,000 swords were shipped to Ming Dynasty China in official trade in an attempt to soak up the production of Japanese weapons and make it harder for pirates in the area to arm. In the Ming Dynasty of China, Japanese swords and their tactics were studied to repel pirates, and wodao and miaodao were developed based on Japanese swords. From this period, the tang, nakago, of many old tachi were cut and shortened into katana. This kind of remake is called suriage. For example, many of the tachi that Masamune forged during the Kamakura period were converted into katana, so his only existing works are katana and tanto. From around the 16th century, many Japanese swords were exported to Thailand, where katana-style swords were made and prized for battle and artwork, and some of them are in the collections of the Thai royal family. From the late Muromachi period, Sengoku period, to the early Edo period, samurai were sometimes equipped with a katana blade pointing downwards like a tachi. This style of sword is called handachi, half tachi. In handachi, both styles were often mixed. For example, fastening to the obi was katana style, but metalworking of the scabbard was tachi style. In the Muromachi period, especially the Sengoku period, people such as farmers, townspeople, and monks could have a sword. However, in 1588 Toyotomi Hideyoshi banned farmers from owning weapons and conducted a sword hunt to forcibly remove swords from anyone identifying as a farmer. Swords forged after 1596 in the Kaiko period of the Azuchi Momoyama period are classified as Shinto, new swords. Japanese swords after Shinto are different from Kodo in forging method and steel tamahagane. This is thought to be because Bizen school, which was the largest swordsmith group of Japanese swords, was destroyed by a great flood in 1590 and the mainstream shifted to Mino school, and because Toyotomi Hideyoshi virtually unified Japan, uniform steel began to be distributed throughout Japan. The Kodo swords, especially the Bizen school swords made in the Kamakura period, had a mid-air yutsuri like a white mist between hamon and shinogi, but in the swords after Shinto it has almost disappeared. In addition, the whole body of the blade became whitish and hard. Almost no one was able to reproduce mid-air yutsuri until Kunihira Kawachi reproduced it in 2014. As the Sengoku period of warring states, ended and the Azuchi Momoyama period to the Edo period started, katana forging also developed into a highly intricate and well-respected art form. Lacquered saya, scabbards, ornate engraved fittings, silk handles and elegant tsuba, handguards, were popular among samurai in the Edo period, and eventually, especially when Japan was in peacetime, katana became more cosmetic and ceremonial items than practical weapons. The Umatada school led by Umatada Myoju, who was considered to be the founder of Shinto, led the improvement of the artistry of Japanese swords in this period. They were both swordsmiths and metalsmiths, and were famous for carving the blade, making metal accoutrements such as tsuba, handguard, remodeling from tachi to katana, suriage, and inscriptions inlaid with gold. During this period, the Tokugawa shogunate required samurai to wear katana and shorter swords in pairs. These short swords were wakizashi and tanto, and wakizashi were mainly selected. This set of two is called a daisho. Only samurai could wear the daisho. It represented their social power and personal honor. Samurai could wear decorative sword mountings in their daily lives, but the Tokugawa shogunate regulated the formal sword that samurai wore when visiting a castle by regulating it as a daisho made of a black scabbard, a hilt wrapped with white ray skin and black string. Japanese swords made in this period are classified as Shinto. In the late 18th century, swordsmith Tsushinshi Masahide criticized that the present katana blades only emphasized decoration and had a problem with their toughness. He insisted that the bold and strong Kodo blade from the Kamakura period to the Nanboku-cho period was the ideal Japanese sword, and started a movement to restore the production method and apply it to katana. Katana made after this is classified as a Shinshinto. One of the most popular swordsmiths in Japan today is Minamoto Kiyomaru, who was active in this Shinshinto period. His popularity is due to his timeless exceptional skill, as he was nicknamed Masamune in Yotsuya, after his disastrous life. His works were traded at high prices and exhibitions were held at museums all over Japan from 2013 to 2014. The idea that the blade of a sword in the Kamakura period is the best has been continued until now, and as of the 21st century, 80% of Japanese swords designated as national treasure in Japan were made in the Kamakura period, and 70% of them were tachi. Between 1945 and 1953, sword manufacture and sword-related martial arts were banned in Japan. Many swords were confiscated and destroyed, and swordsmiths were not able to make a living. Since 1953, Japanese swordsmiths have been allowed to work, but with severe restrictions. Swordsmiths must be licensed and serve a 5-year apprenticeship, and only licensed swordsmiths are allowed to produce Japanese swords. Nihonto, only 2 longswords per month are allowed to be produced by each swordsmith, and all swords must be registered with the Japanese government. Outside Japan, some of the modern katanas being produced by Western swordsmiths use modern steel alloys, such as L6 and A2. These modern swords replicate the size and shape of the Japanese katana and are used by martial artists for iaido and even for cutting practice tameshigiri. Mass-produced swords including iaido and shinken in the shape of katana are available from many countries, though China dominates the market. These types of swords are typically mass-produced and made with a wide variety of steels and methods. According to the Parliamentary Association for the Preservation and Promotion of Japanese Swords, organized by Japanese Diet members, many katana distributed around the world as of the 21st century are fake Japanese swords made in China. The Sankei Shimbun analyzed that this is because the Japanese government allowed swordsmiths to make only 24 Japanese swords per person per year in order to maintain the quality of Japanese swords. Many swordsmiths after the Edo period have tried to reproduce the sword of the Kamakura period, which is considered as the best sword in the history of Japanese swords, but they have failed. Then, in 2014, Kunihira Kawachi succeeded in reproducing it and won the Masamune Prize, the highest honor as a swordsmith. No one could win the Masamune Prize unless he made an extraordinary achievement, and in the section of tachi and katana, no one had won for 18 years before Kawachi. A katana is a Japanese sword characterized by a curved, single-edged blade with a circular or squared guard and long grip to accommodate two hands. Developed later than the tachi, it was used by samurai in feudal Japan and worn with the edge facing upward. Since the Muromachi period, many old tachi were cut from the root and shortened, and the blade at the root was crushed and converted into katana. The specific term for katana in Japan is uchigatana, and the term katana often refers to single-edged swords from around the world. Historically, katana have been regarded not only as weapons but also as works of art, especially for high-quality ones. For a long time, Japanese people have developed a unique appreciation method in which the blade is regarded as the core of their aesthetic evaluation rather than the sword mountings decorated with luxurious lacquer or metal works. It is said that the following three objects are the most noteworthy objects when appreciating a blade. The first is the overall shape referred to as sugata. Curvature, length, width, tip, and shape of tang of the sword are the objects for appreciation. The second is a fine pattern on the surface of the blade, which is referred to as hata or jigen. By repeatedly folding and forging the blade, fine patterns such as fingerprints, tree rings and bark are formed on its surface. The third is hamon. Hamon is a white pattern of the cutting edge produced by quenching and tempering. The object of appreciation is the shape of hamon and the crystal particles formed at the boundary of hamon. Depending on the size of the particles, they can be divided into two types, a ni and a nioi, which makes them look like stars or mist. In addition to these three objects, a swordsmith's signature and a file pattern engraved on tang, and a carving inscribed on the blade, which is referred to as horimono, are also the objects of appreciation. The Hanami clan, which was an authority of appraisal of Japanese swords, rated Japanese swords from these artistic points of view. In addition, experts of modern Japanese swords judge when and by which swordsmith school the sword was made from these artistic points of view. Generally, the blade and the sword mounting of Japanese swords are displayed separately in museums, and this tendency is remarkable in Japan. For example, the Nagoya Japanese Sword Museum, Nagoya Tuken World, one of Japan's largest sword museums, posts separate videos of the blade and the sword mounting on its official website and YouTube. Multiple sword world records were made with a katana and verified by Guinness World Records. Iaido master Isao Mashi set the record for most martial arts katana cuts to one mat tsuguri. Fastest 1000 martial arts sword cuts, most sword cuts to straw mats in 3 minutes, and fastest tennis ball cut by sword. There are various records for tameshigiri. For example, the Greek Agesilaus Visexitis set the record for most martial arts sword cuts in 1 minute on the 25th of June 2016. Katana were used by samurai both in the battlefield and for practicing several martial arts, and modern martial artists still use a variety of katana. Martial arts in which training with katana is used include Aikido, Iijutsu, Badojutsu, Iaido, Kenjutsu, Kendo, Ninjutsu and Tenshin Shoten Kotori Shinto Ryu. However, for safety reasons, katana used for martial arts are usually blunt-edged, to reduce the risk of injury. Sharp katana are only really used during tameshigiri, blade testing, where a practitioner practices cutting a bamboo or tatami straw post. If mishandled in its storage or maintenance, the katana may become irreparably damaged. The blade should be stored horizontally in its sheath, curved down and edge facing upward to maintain the edge. It is extremely important that the blade remain well oiled, powdered and polished, as the natural moisture residue from the hands of the user will rapidly cause the blade to rust if not cleaned off. The traditional oil used is choji oil, 99% mineral oil and 1% clove oil for fragrance. Similarly, when stored for longer periods, it is important that the katana be inspected frequently and aired out if necessary in order to prevent rust or mold from forming. Mold may feed off the salts in the oil used to polish the blade.